around us in terms of the gender gap. And the specific area we're trying to focus is women entrepreneurship. We just find that, while there are so many different women entrepreneurs, the venture-backed ones are probably in single digits, like, 9% of startups are women founded is the number, 12% or 13%. But if you kind of really look at it, it's 10%. So CEO Club, essentially what we try and do is amplify the voices of women entrepreneurs, bring inspirational figures onto the forum, and be there as a support system for fellow entrepreneurs who are trying to break out, who are trying to build strong businesses, with just advice, mentoring, and even funding. Very limited amount of angel funding, but that, and essentially help fellow entrepreneurs scale up their organizations and think big. So we are really looking forward to hearing about your journey of Map My Genome. And of course, you've been a pioneer in this space. And I've heard loads and loads. I remember your photograph on the front page of Times of India at one point. And of course, I've heard a lot from Shalu, but I'll let Shalu introduce you. And then we'd love to hear a little bit about your journey and your advice. And there are many questions that people have sent in, which we'd like you to speak about. Welcome. Thank you, Anu. Shalu.
Anu needs no introduction. She's a well-respected and admired public figure, and somebody I am proud to call my friend. Anu Acharya as many of you know, was the founder of OSIMUM, a biogenomics outsourcing company, which I had the pleasure of hearing her talk about it over multiple glasses of wine one evening, about how she grew when acquisitions were not in the forefront. She acquired companies in multiple continents. She raised funds when raising funds was still not was not the in thing to do. It was not easy. I'm not saying it's easy now, but it was way more hard when she went and did it in 2007, and so on. She has sold a company. She's a serial entrepreneur, and on top, and she has also successfully pivoted the company from being a B2B company to a B2C company with Map My Genome. On top of that, Anu is a fierce mentor and coach. She's been on boards of governing council of CSIR, National Institute of Biomedical Genomics, and also vice chair of Global Agenda Council on Genetics in World Economic Forum. Anu is a poet, and has published her books on poetry called Atomic Pohe, Random Rhymes at Odd Times on Science, Non-Science, and Nonsense. She's published multiple articles on mergers and acquisitions, and is a published author in multiple newspapers across the world. And most importantly, Anu, he has a fantastic sense of humor.
Thank you. I think now I feel like I must have been doing something really, really extraordinary. But perhaps I think it is very. I think with Shalu, I've had many interesting moments. We've had many heart-to-hearts in multiple countries, I would say. And I'm looking forward to this session today. So,
Great. Thank you, Anu. Thank you for taking the time. And thanks, Shalu, for that wonderful introduction. So, Anu, why don't we start with, your journey of building Map My Genome? Of course, you're a pioneer. I don't think there was this whole space of personal genomics existed, or at least in any meaningful way when you started to take your solution to market. So to tell everyone here about your journey of building it, the challenges, the highs, the lows, and where you are at right now in your journey.
sure. So, I think just to give a little perspective, I think my background was not in genomics. I went to IIT Kharagpur. I was very much, wanting to be a physicist all my life because my dad was one, and so I think that was, at least growing up, that was my whole passion and love for being able to do something. Maybe I used to, my books that I used to read were mostly Feynman and Einstein. All these guys were like, but I think ultimately, I think once I went to IIT, I realized that I didn't want to be a mediocre physicist, right? And I think I somehow felt that maybe that was not. So I changed my goals a little bit, and I wanted to do an MBA, but of course my dad was a professor, so I didn't have the bandwidth or to be able to sponsor something like that if I wanted to go to the US. So I joined a master's and a PhD program. I did a couple of, but I ended up doing a couple of masters and ended up joining a startup, even though there were many other opportunities that were available at that point of time. This is in 96, 97. And so I started working for this small startup, which grew very, very rapidly. And I think it was one of the best experiences of my life because, in many ways, I think if I had joined a large company, maybe I would have been a different person. And over there, I think I saw the challenges, I saw the fun parts of growing this company. It went from being, I think I was probably the 9th or 10th employee, and it went to 200. So I think I saw that whole expansion within a year. And then they were going to be acquired and all of that fun stuff. So then I decided to join another company where I thought I'm now in a large consulting company, and I will be looking at how large companies are. Interestingly enough, I think the assignment I got was also to, again, basically work with a startup who was a one-person show, and we were actually helping them building up this product from scratch. So this was like before Facebook and before everything. We helped them in building a social network, and it was called entrepower.com. Of course, they never received their second, third round of funding, and that thing went away. But at the same time, I think, it was a great time for people to start thinking about entrepreneurship. And Google was not even there at that point, right? So this is very early. We were thinking about many different ventures, and I think we tried a few, failed at a few, did all those fun things. And then finally, I think genomics seemed like an interesting enough area, because if you did a search on InfoSeek, you would find 3 entries. And I said, okay, good. It's a new, interesting area. It will probably be intellectually challenging. If you want to move to India, this is it. And we had a co-founder who understood the subject. Of course, I had no background in that subject, so neither did my co-founder, Subhash. So only one person out of 3 understood the subject. But anyway, I think I was, early 20s, late 20s, and I said, yeah, why not? This is it. And we packed our bags, moved to India, left all nice jobs that we had, and came back and started Osmum Bio. This was in the year 2000. And I think I learned on the job a lot more than I learned. I used to stay up late night trying to understand the subject because I clearly didn't know enough about it. So we did a lot of interesting things in Osmum. We worked with a US entity to be able to help us in developing the coursework so that we could understand this subject, get people trained, because there was no one in India at that point who understood a lot on bioinformatics and genomics and all of that. So we started doing that. We worked with Michigan Tech, and then with another university, we were building this up. And we still have some of those employees who we got in at that point of time from 2001 onwards. So we built that, and then we went through a very unusual path. So we started building software products in Ossimum. We were also going to build up a lab in the US. That was taking a while. So we finally decided, let's go start selling software. And that's how we got our first few bits of revenue. I think the first customer I still remember, of course. And I think that continued. We were able to build a little bit of revenue over a period of time. And then 2005, a very interesting thing happened. We were going to get a customer who was going to give us $1 million in revenue. And they finally suddenly stopped writing to us. And I got a little bit worried because this was going to be our biggest customer. And then all of a sudden, there was no communication. And then finally, I get a call from the COO. This was a public company. And they called me and they said, do you want to buy us? And I was a little bit taken aback, but I said, yeah, sure, why not? I had no idea they were about 10 or 20 times bigger than us, but it didn't matter. We finally ended up buying 1/4 of that business, and we went forward. Next year, we were going to buy another company, and on the last day, they dropped out. But we got another company, and then we went on. For 3 years, we were on a roll. We were constantly acquiring companies. And we acquired one of the most well-known entities in this space in the US. It was also a public company called GeneLogic. And so that's how we built. We built one of the largest genomic services company. We had a very large presence in the US, in Europe, and in India. So it was very, like Shalu said, it was a B2B business. So we were working with the likes of Novartis and AstraZeneca and others that were allowing us to be able to then, we would sell them databases, we were doing a lot of their clinical trial work, but not in the usual way. We were doing the genomics piece of that clinical trial. And so we were doing a lot of this interesting part. And then finally, I think it was, we were at 100 crores revenue, everything was fine. But I felt that there was something missing. And that something missing, I think, came from the fact that, if you looked at what was happening at least in the US and other parts of the world, a lot was moving to the clinic, a lot was moving to the consumer. But in India, we were not yet thinking about it. And I think that's when I felt that it was time that we build something for the consumer. And we started thinking about that whole process. We proposed it to the board. The board rejected the idea. So out came a new company, and that's how MapMyGenome was born. So in a very very long, convoluted, but that's how MapMyGenome was actually born, in some ways. And it was made a completely separate entity. But there was a big, I think for me, it was a huge challenge, because it was not just I was still the CEO of Ossimum, and there was MapMyGenome. So my co-founder was then running MapMyGenome in the beginning, because I didn't, I really couldn't step off from Ossimum. And I think that's where one of the most interesting parts of the whole process came, because this was before the actual launch. And then he asked me to become the CEO. I said, I'll only do it if we switch roles, right? But I think that was where we started. And then I agreed to doing that, but I had to still convince and create a whole company, board and everything else. So that's how, built MapMyGenome. I convinced some board members, and they got on board, and then finally made the decision to start the company. So I hope that is a good starting point of how we started MapMyGenome. I can't hear you though.
Wow, I was saying absolutely what a fascinating journey it has been. From outside, you just seem like it's like a linear curve, if you will, but just all the twists and turns you talked about. And one of the questions that was coming to me, Anu, is just this whole the whole inorganic growth process, right? That is a very different way of thinking of building a business. Most of the people I speak to are about building their product and organic growth, and then raising money to build the product and taking it to market and so on. So I wanted to ask you, what was different in that case? So when you're thinking about acquisitions, is it that you go ahead and raise funding and then acquire, or you look at acquisition targets based on your strategy, vision, and then go out and seek funds to acquire that? What was that process like?
So actually, the first acquisition, we did not raise money. We did it out of our own, we basically funded that. And it was, I think, the best acquisition we did, because I think the amount of the customer acquisition, the amount of publicity, the amount of goodwill that we generated. Of course, it was not all goodwill. There was many angry customers also, because they had stopped the service in between before we took it on. But I think it was, for us, it was a great way to be able to launch into what was international markets at that time. So I think the first acquisition was done with zero external funding. The second acquisition that we did, we now had IFC very interested in our strategy, and they used to ask me every year what is going on. So there was I remember there was a professor who was from SRI, who had come and done a scouting of all companies at many years before that. And he used to keep asking me, do you want to take funding? Do you want funding? What is your revenue? What's going on? And then finally, after we had done the first acquisition, I think my appetite for even getting some funds increased. So I said, yeah, sure. We are currently at this revenue, and would not be a bad idea. We're thinking about acquiring another company. So then he said, okay, this sounds like a perfect time to be able to get IFC to invest in you guys, and that's how we go. So it was interesting, because IFC takes a very long time, and in the time that they took, we had the company, the target we had identified, backed out because the founder had cancer and he didn't want to sell. So he had some emotional attachment. He decided he won't sell. So we were left with IFC ready to give us funds, but we didn't have now a company to acquire. So we had to go and scout for companies, and we scouted for 2 and finally acquired 1. And that's how the first round of investment came in. The third investment that came in, which was a company that was very well known, it was a company that was probably, I would love to, many years before that, I would be like dying to sell something to them, because they were such a well-known company that I knew the company well. And so I was in the US, I was in North Carolina doing some other pitch for selling one of our lab information systems, something like that. And I get a call from a banker. And he basically says that, GeneLogic is up for sale, and would you be interested? I actually left what I was doing at that point and took a flight and went straight to meet them, because I felt that this was an opportunity of a lifetime and that I shouldn't miss, because I really liked the company. And so we acquired the company. It was a very interesting time for us, because I think the time when we got the funding and the time we finished the acquisition, and because it was a public company, I think it was very interesting, because we almost did not get the deal. And so investors were pushing us, they were trying to squeeze us, and we were trying to make this acquisition happen. So it all happened. Ultimately, everything worked out. So we raised almost about $17 million. Most of it was for acquisition of the company. And that's how we built it. But it was a great company, great products, but bleeding heavily. So that is the kind of company we had acquired, and we had to work very hard to reduce the burn. By within a year, we had to reduce the burn by more than $8 million. So it was a substantial investment in terms of going back and forth, getting the culture right, getting making sure that we could cut down on that burn and everything else. So it was, I think, very interesting times that we went through over there.
And Anu, the process of integration of these companies, and these were all, at least the first two companies were startups in their own right, and they were all in different places, it seems. What was that process like? Just ensuring that they retain the core of what you were purchasing them for, but also you are able to operate as one large company with the same mission. So, what was that process like?
So the first one was not so difficult because it was mostly an asset sort of a buy, and we could take in the employees that we wanted. And so we acquired, and it was very good because actually we got a lot of these uh, German scientists and others who came in to set up our lab and everything else. So it was, we had a very good team. It was not a very large team, it was but a fantastic team that helped us build the lab in India, helped us build the capabilities and understanding, and I think that was very necessary. When we did the second one, we actually did not try to integrate it too much within the company. It was based in the Netherlands. So we tried to make sure that the German and the Netherlands piece was put together. And we did have a lot of ways of onboarding them, but it was because some of parts of what they were doing in Netherlands was different from what we were doing here, except we also then started manufacturing it in India. I think there was some exchange of scientists back and forth, but it was not like, we had like, I didn't stay there for 100 days, for instance. Whereas when we did the third acquisition, which was probably our biggest acquisition, I spent close to, first many months and days even before the acquisition closed, to write down a plan for the integration and everything else. Spent a lot of time with their senior leaders, made sure that they understood what we were all about and in terms of our mission. And I think also we had to be there to lead by example, because this was a company used to spending a lot of money, and then then you had to change that whole thought process. So I think we had to do a lot of those things, and that's how I think we were able to get to the, the integration piece done. But it was a lot of time spent over there, especially at least by me and my co-founders.
Right, right, right. Great. If there are any questions from anyone, please feel free to ask, because I have a long list of questions. Shalu, would you? Yes, Kanchan. You're on mute, Kanchan.
Oh my God, this is, I think, the second time this is happening to me in the COVID era. Normally, I laugh at others when this happens to them. So, yeah. So, yeah, coming back to my question, Anu, so very fascinating story about, acquiring companies, very exciting times as well. And, this is not, I've heard from other entrepreneurs, they're mostly talking about how they grew their company organically. So, this is a very different perspective, and, how you made it a success, which is, there's so much to learn from you. My question was around building your company culture as such, because I think you mentioned with the third integration when you basically got the senior executives on board, and so there's a little bit of flavor of integrating the culture there. But that was generally wondering about how does a founder build that culture, and what do they do when they are aberrations, when people are not kind of listening to that whatever they have in mind. So how do you handle that, and develop a wonderful culture?
So I would say, I mean, all the acquisitions were nice and fun and headlights of my career. But I think ultimately you're building you are organically building as well, because if you don't do that, I think it will fall off very quickly. So I think at least the way we build the culture, and and I haven't come to MacMy Genome yet, but I think a lot of the people who were there in Ossimum still continue to be there with us even now. So we have employees who've been with us for 20 plus years now.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And I think part of that was that they all, one is to make them feel that sense of, what we are able to achieve in terms of, the impact that we're doing. Of course, many of the people who stayed, I'm sure if they would have gone somewhere else, they would have made money as also. I mean, it's not that they wouldn't have, done well or otherwise. And many people did leave as well. But
Right.
I think it was being able to build the kind of culture where people get that independence, but they also get very quick decisions, that they're able to make those decisions quickly. And I
Right.
think empowering them to be able to do that, I think helps them in doing that. And we also have had very actually today is one of our parties, but we usually used to do very wild parties, and I think that really helps in building culture within
That
the.
is so interesting to know, because yeah, obviously you would also have so much fun at the party. But also coming back to the work from home or a remote culture, how do you build a bonding then?
So we didn't work from home. So let me be. I think we are one of the few who did not have to work from home, and we insist on people coming. I mean, except for the ones for that first couple of months where we did not work at home, where we did work at home. And even at the time when we did work at home, we have like a system that sort of connects all of us. So we use one of those software systems that allow us to be able to feel connected. But there's nothing like physical connect. I think it's a far better thing to be able to meet in person and be able to do that. So we were making sure that we were testing everybody every week, so that we didn't have, if we had a case, we would quickly separate, that person out and not sure, make sure that they are not, integrating with that. So over the course of last 1.5 year, I think we've had very, very few cases of COVID. And whenever they were there, we found them very early, and that's how we were able to actually meet in person. I think the only thing now is that we've grown very rapidly. So in the last 1 year, I think we have now grown to more than 200 people, and which means, and we are working around the clock. So we are going from being like a regular time, or not regular, but whatever, some normal time, uh, listening to a 24-hour schedule where we have some airport is constantly 24-hour schedule. We have a 24-hour customer service team. We have a 24-hour, so there are many teams that are working at night shifts and other shifts where we don't get to see them. The lab is 24 hours. So I think it is a very different sort of a thing where maybe for the first time in these 20 years, I don't know a lot of the people. We are hiring 20 people in a day. And it's obviously very hard for me to be able to connect with each one of them, especially with masks. But I think that's part of where we are. So we try to make sure that at least online we are connected, whether it's on Bittrex that we use or WhatsApp or other ways, and make sure that we share as much as possible both the fun things as well as the interesting pieces of what is going on. And I think that's necessary, that from making sure that it's sticky. And I think as we grow, we are adding on more centers in other parts of the country. I think that will be the real challenge in terms of making sure that everybody feels as connected to the company as we were able to do. So in Osimum, I think when we went from being 15, 20 people to being 40, 50 people, it was fine. Went to 200, then went to 400. I think it's around the time when you're between 200 to 400 that it becomes a little bit challenging, and therefore you have to have enough strong leaders that are managing those teams under you. So empowering that senior leadership within the company is probably the most important thing that you can do. So what I do now is that we've come to that stage now. We've got to that stage where we are 200 plus people. So getting the individual managers, giving them as much accountability as possible, making sure they're making all the decisions is the most important step in making sure that you scale up without feeling that they're disconnected. Because I think at least they have to feel connected or strongly connected with one strong leader within the company. And if it can't be the entrepreneur, it has to be the next layer, and so on. And I think the moment they feel that, they automatically also feel part of the company. So I think that's the way, at least the way I've seen in the last 20 years, is that the first 20, 30 people, very easy, right? They become like your family. Then you grow them a little bit bigger. You start giving them a little more challenges and teams and building them out. I think the biggest challenge is, have you selected the right leadership? And then everything works fine.
Sure. Thank you, Anu. Thank you.
I know I had a question about something that every time that amazes me about you, which is you've built resilience as a person and as a company. So, how did you go about doing that?
It's in my genes.
I told you about the humor.
So it is quite interesting, and she knows Vash also. So I think between the two founders, um, I think they are different personality types, right? So they have one. I mean, I think I'm the one who doesn't get stressed easily. I think part of it is, I think, genetic. Part of it is also that I don't really bother to. I mean, there's that book. What is that? I forgot. But Swash keeps telling that. I think they wrote it for you, where you don't give you don't give a rat's ass to a lot of things going on around you. And for me, I think it doesn't matter. Like I don't have guilt trips. I don't have different things. And I think that's easier for me, therefore, to be able to be a little bit stress free and go on and be able to build that. But you also, within a company, need somebody who's doing that nitpicking and detail thing. And I think, or whether it's building out an operation, building out something else. And I think Sbash does that wonderfully. He's, when we are building a lab and it has to be built in 20 days, I think he's the right person that would go out there and make sure that, the carpenter is not doing something stupid or doing anything else. And he likes to do that. And I don't like to do that. So I think it's about finding the balance in terms of who within the team can do it, and making sure that you're not necessarily doing everything yourself. And I don't believe that doing everything by myself is necessary for making sure that the organization is stable and resilient. And I think the other is making quick decisions, because in a field like ours, I think there are changes. This time, I think when COVID hit, it was positive change in some form, because I think it was 20 years of doing something in this space. And for us to be able to make those decisions, we were one of the earliest who quickly decided during the lockdown that we would do this, that we would set up a lab. And I think that was probably the hardest time to be able to do it, but it was the best time to also be able to do it. So what I've realized in life is that the hardest time is usually the best time to do anything. So if you do it at a time where everybody else thinks it's hard, then I think that shows your capability of being able to do something like that. And so finding that out, finding early opportunities, finding out when others haven't thought about it, I think is what makes you a little bit more, gives you a little bit of an edge. But ultimately, I think resilience will be, again, dependent on the team we hire, and the opportunities that we either decide to pursue, and the ones that we decided to cut off as well. Because I think that's almost as important as what you decide to go forward with, because there are many things you can do, and sometimes you have to cut things off as well. So I think I wouldn't say that I was not as emotionally connected to every decision earlier, but today I think I've reached that point where I think it's fine. It is fine to be able to not do something that you've spent time and energy on, because you have to start thinking about it long term. So I think that's one thing, that when you're running a business for the first time, you are a little bit emotionally connected to that business. But I think as you grow up and you've gone through that process, then it becomes easier to not start feeling that way. And I think it helped by actually being like that in general life as well.
Right. Anu, as you were describing, your co-founder and your relationship, and I want to get to Map My Genome and the COVID pivot, but just as a follow-up to that, as you were describing your the personalities of the two co-founders, I was reminded of my relationship with my my co-founder in my previous company, in Teletots, and both of us are very different in our approaches, and we would go into a meeting and we'd come out just drawing very different conclusions for the meeting, and we'd just laugh and just like, were we in the same meeting? But in most cases, it worked to our advantage because we were able to cover each other's blind spots, but therefore also, you know, uh, challenges that we had to overcome, processes we had to build so to get to that. So I'm curious about what were some of those things you did to keep your relationship working for you? What were some of the challenges you had to overcome to get to that seamless stage of the two co-founders working together and reading each other, even when they are very different people and personalities overall?
So I forgot to mention he's also my husband.
Ah,
Uh, but I think we
that's
know.
even more complicated then.
Yeah, but I think we met each other in college. I think we've known each other for 30 years now. So I think there is a slightly different. We've sort of grown up with each other, so we know each other's, um, you know, little craziness or eccentricities and all that. And I think we both like that about about each other. So it is fine. But we also can have a honest debate about things and not get worried about how it's going to affect our relationship. And I think that comes about because we are different people, and we are he's the more if there is somebody, he's the one who will go out, take a lot of attention and making sure that that is done. But I think when you look at all the employees, they're very happy to come to me and complain and do whatever. And for me, some things I take out pieces of it and I'll act upon it. I might not even bother. A lot of things will not bother me, but they've thought they've done their job of telling me what they need to do. It's the other way around for him, right? So I think it works. And I think the way that you're going to get this done are two, three things, right? One is that if you can make sure that others don't take advantage of the fact that you are both co-owners in the company. And so people would keep coming to me and saying, well, Subhash approved. I said, tell him to write it in an email and then only I will approve. Then it's fine, right? So one was to get this habit of documentation and not saying that, if he has approved, whether I should overrule it, but it was basically being able to say, ask him to send it in an email, then I will do it, and say vice versa, right? So whether if I have told, then, and we both respect each other's decisions, so it's not that we will, we will not accept, but most of the time it was people trying to make their decisions being felt without the other person's knowledge. So that is one part. The second part was to clearly separate out where each one is good at, right? So we tried all the things first, but we realized that there are some things that I'm better at and the other things he's better at. And I think that comes through experience. And like I was mentioning, I think, when luckily we both don't like the same things. So it was good to be able to say, I like going to, I like giving talks, networking with people, going, presenting, doing something like that. I like building the team and all of that. He likes doing the operations, he likes doing the finance, he likes doing that. So it was a process of discovery and finding out what you're good at, and then spelling it out, writing it down, and then the best part is that he never has a title in the company, so that helps. So I can veto anything. I think that is probably the one thing that works always. So
Great. So Anu, I think we've just, I think we have about 10 minutes left and we haven't even gotten to Map My Genome and the impact of COVID. So would love to hear, the building of Map My Genome from that point onwards, that pivot that we talked about, and then what impact did COVID have on the business, and how did you have to react to something that kind of a black swan event?
So we started Map My Genome, or rather, I would say the first product in Map My Genome called Genome Patri, where we are basically, it's something that people can now order online, get the kit home, and then we are able to get the sample, and we then give them an overall perspective on their health. But it's about looking at different things, your traits, your risks for diseases, how you respond to drugs, and also things like ancestry and all of those fun things. So there are a lot of things you can do with DNA, and I think we decided that we start with one product. And it was not an easy thing because the cost of the test at that time when we started was quite high. So it was priced at around 25,000 rupees. So it was not something that I could just sell to everybody that I could find on the anywhere and everywhere. So it took a bit of understanding the target audience, where we needed to focus, and how we are going to approach. We also looked at saying which kind of channel partners we were going to form, and making sure that we were able to spread that. So it was, in the beginning, I would say it was a little bit of trial and error. We tried a lot of different things. Some things were really unsuccessful. There are people who were saying that we'll do it as a individual house owners. We tried a lot of things that did not work out. And then there were some things that worked out, whether it was finding the right hospitals, path labs and others, finding the corporates that were interested and all of that. So we looked at different pieces of it. And I would say we made a lot of mistakes and a lot of things that we decided that are not working and therefore need to be cut off. The direct to consumer channel was working, so we said let's focus a little bit more on that, and as well as the partnerships that we had. Then slowly, I think over the years, we realized that because we had built a product where we put a lot of emphasis on genetic counseling and nobody else did that, we realized that people were reaching out to us even for clinical questions. So they were asking us things like about very serious decisions on genetics and disorders and all of that. So we then decided to start offering some of the clinical genomics, as we call it. So we started doing things like your exome sequencing and other things that we were doing. And we started building this up. And over the years, I think we built very strong partnerships with a few channels. We started doing things that we were getting online. And we had partnerships on other online partners as well, whether it was Amazon, 1mg or the likes, and Geo and everybody else. So it was like a lot of interest because it's a new area. People are very interested, but it's not very easy for everybody to be able to sell something like that. So it went on for a while. And I think we reached a reasonable, I would say, a reasonable revenue in what we were doing. But I think the biggest change that we did, we were adding little products every year. We were adding, one new product or two new products. But I think the biggest change that happened was during COVID. And I think that's where it changed the entire DNA of the company in some form. Because like I mentioned, I think we started a new COVID testing center in our office. And we were not used to people walking into our office for giving samples, even though that was something they could do. Most people would order it online at home and be able to do it. So now suddenly we were getting almost up to 500, 600 people that were walking in, and to our company where we were not, it was not something that we normally did, but it was a time that, I think COVID necessitated that whole change in terms of how we were doing something like that. And we had also bid for the Hyderabad airport very early. So we actually built a lab in 20 days in the airport. And that became, I think it was very good for us because we were able to now look at every single incoming and outgoing passengers. When we first started, it was a lot of, I think there was a lot of investment to be made. There were very few passengers, but I think over a period of time, it was something that made sense for us. So we started the airport lab, we started the Madhapur lab, and then we said we were getting corporates that we were working with, and all of them said that either we go to their site, which is what we continue to do in many cases, but they all wanted many centers across the city. So we started building in KPHB and in Gachibowli and various other places in Hyderabad. And now we are also thinking about, our lab in Delhi is about to open. But during this whole thing, we also started seeing that people wanted antibody tests. So we started offering antibody tests. And I was also involved in a lot of sero surveys with several state governments. And we were doing studies like T-cell studies and neutralizing antibodies and many other things. And so ultimately, some of these pieces also came into our business. So I think it was an interesting time for us to be able to say that, okay, now if we think about it, all our business minus COVID, what will happen going forward? And I think what will happen going forward is that we take the best pieces of what is there and make sure that we can combine it with our core business and make sure that it's a value proposition that we did not have as strong as before. So, which means that when we are doing now the preventive tests, we will make sure we combine it with other blood tests so that it becomes a better value proposition for our customers. So that's what we did. A lot of things changed, but I think in the end we are still pursuing the same mission for MapMatching.
Right, right. I have two other questions there, Anu. One is, around the whole market leadership position versus followership position. Typically, being a market leader is seen as an advantage, and that, you're creating a market. But I wanted to ask you, did you see any challenges there as well? And what are the dynamics of being a market leader versus a follower?
So it's interesting. So I think what happens is, especially in new areas like ours, when things start to, like, if people start reading about it in media, they think it's a very simple business. So a lot of people jump into it, and then they realize that it's actually not that simple. So this happened even in Optimum times. I remember when we had first announced, because for us we had done the bioinformatics training because we couldn't find people. It was not because we were trying to make a buck out of for that thing. So we used to do these ads. People used to jump in and come in, and there would be people who would put ads right outside our office as well, right? And so it was like, it was really crazy at that time. I think every day there were new companies that were coming up, and I think one thing that I think didn't bother me at all was the fact that I think we had to just continue doing what we're doing and doing it better and not be bothered about what others were doing. And I think that's allowed us to be able to survive and sustain. I think it's the same thing in MapMy Genome. We realized that a lot of companies had come up and a lot of people thought it was a quick, easy way to make money. And I think that's where people fall short, because I think building any business takes a lot of effort, time, and energy. And even though you can probably get something that is easier to be able to pick up, I think it's a harder thing to be able to actually sustain that whole process.
Right.
And therefore, I think many of them started in the personal genomics space, and they quickly also exited from the business as well. Some of them have moved into other areas, but I think we are probably the only one strongly we persisting in this space, because I strongly believe that this is what is going to be of the biggest change in terms of how we are going to look at healthcare in the future. So I think it's more that I think if you feel that you've created a market, you've been able to build it, there will be people who will come in, and if they don't come in, then you have to be worried, because it means it doesn't sound exciting to others. But at the same time, I think not everyone will survive, because it'll take them a lot more energy than they think it is. So people will move into something easier, and I think therefore, people like me who like the challenge will continue to be doing or staying in that space, because I think if I had to do something that was easier, I think maybe I would get bored.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's where kind of the inner passion and the motivation and belief in that space comes in. And I'd say EdTech is in that zone right now. Every second day we see one competitor coming up and then overbidding on Google ads and Facebook ads, and 2 months later they've burnt out. So it's we're pretty much in that state in EdTech at the moment. The second question I had, and I know we only have a few minutes left, so the second question I had was, as you are getting into this whole COVID testing, the space of diagnostics is kind of consolidating. There are some very large players there like ThyroCare and Path Labs and so on. How do you see them? Do you see them as channels, competition, partners, collaborators?
So I think some of the larger ones were always our channel partners, right? They were always selling our products. So,
Right.
but one wise man once told me that when large companies look at small companies, they look at you that you're currently dripping, and the moment it starts flowing, then they either will try to acquire you, or or try to do something like similar. So I think one is that we have to make sure we become large enough at that point, when that happens, or the other is that if there is a great, I mean, if we grow it to a substantial space, if there's a large company that wants to acquire, we will obviously look at what they are interested in. But I think at this point of time, they are not yet. This is not yet their main focus. Even though they continue to sell our products, I think it is it this requires a little bit of a different DNA than a pure diagnostic company. And I think that's why when we are looking at adding the diagnostic piece to our business, I think we are thinking about it from a different angle. We are thinking about how do we make sure that we can give this to consumers in an app that will allow them to be able to look at it from a data-driven perspective rather than saying, I got my test done, right? So I think when we are looking at all of those aspects, I think way we approach that same problem is different from the way they approach. So they have advantages in some things, and there are advantages that we may have in other areas. So.
Got it. We are absolutely at the end of the hour. If anybody has any questions, we can ask. And then I want Anu to recite at least a couplets of her poetry. We can't let you go without saying that. So anybody have any questions for Anu? Great. So, Anu, I think I actually still have just loads and loads of questions. We'll probably have to get together again sometime, maybe in Hyderabad or Bangalore, and over a glass of wine or coffee. But thank you so very much. It was just an inspiring story of resilience and what you have built, and what you've pioneered and continue to build. So thank you for taking the time. And if you could share a few lines from your poetry, that'll be a great kind of cherry on top.
Sure. Let me do one which I just recently remembered. So if you want, I can put that little piece of 1 second. It doesn't work. No. Okay, never mind. Let me see if I can. It's not letting me share anyway. So I'll just read it out then. So I think yesterday or some few days ago, and I'd written this in 2015, so it's a little dated, but let me anyway. It's more about myself. So, so this is a poem that I wrote using some of my favorite books, but it's about my life. So it says, surely I was joking that instead of Feynman lectures and assembling the 6 easy pieces that would give me the pleasure of finding things out, I wanted to be an entrepreneur and take the not so easy 6 pieces and imagine the ripple effect. But I said to myself, what do you care what other people think? Don't you have time to think? The meaning of it all, life, my perfectly reasonable deviations are best described as an adventure of a curious character.
Wow, really nice. Really
Lovely.
nice.
It doesn't, once doesn't rhyme.
Oh, but it's beautiful, and I have all of those Feynman books on my shelf. The pleasure of finding things out, and I haven't read them. Of course, the Surely You're Joking I've read, and I'm reading a very funny book these days. It's called Dear Fahrenheit 451. I don't know if you've heard of it. It is by this librarian who is writing love letters to the books that she cares about.
Oh, I should
And
read it.
she's really irreverent and really funny.
Sounds like me. I think I would love that.
So that's how you reminded me of her. But thank you so much, Anu. It was a fascinating talk, and I hope to catch up in person with you soon. Thank you.
I will when I come to Bangalore for sure.
Yes, let's do that.
And it's due, Anu.
I know it is. We have to repeat what we did a few months ago.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Anu.